So in one of the previous lessons, we were outputting console log a whole bunch of times. We were doing some calculations with the functions, and we were outputting console log a whole ton of times. So we had something like we had a function, and I'm going to actually bring back one of those old functions because it's going to make it a lot easier for us to write through this code. So we had a function and we were passing maybe a value there. We were incrementing f, and we were console logging that information out, and then we were just simply calling, I believe, to the function. So I had something like a plus f or something like that I was console logging out. So this one I'm just going to simply do the my function, and I'm going to have a 5, and if I want to run this a whole bunch of times, see what turns out here. And we see that within the console log we see this repeating. But one of the problems was that I had to actually output this a whole bunch of times, and which was all fine because I was just simply able to copy and paste. But what if you don't have copy and paste? What if you're working out something more complex calculations? You don't want to be going in, rewriting this, updating the argument here that we're passing, and so on. So that's where we get loops. And loops allow us to, as the name implies, loop through values. So I'm going to set a value for I, and I'm going to do a check to see if I is less than 10. So this is the amount of times I'm going to loop through. So you always need to have something that's going to break you out of the loop, and this is why usually I like to format it this way. There's several different ways to write loops. So I can do something like my function and output it in this type of format, and we see that we do get that same look that we had, but there's a lot less code being written. And that's also one of those things that you definitely want to do, is you want to write less and less code. So I can even do something like I and have it incrementing by 2 now, or it should be incrementing by 2. And there's quite a few different options that I can do. So I had that f increasing, so it started out at 14, it keeps increasing every time I run the function, and over here I keeps incrementing as well because I've got that I plus plus 1, which we had seen before. So this is a great reason to save time when you're creating these types of loops. You can also do loops when looping through content. So if I wanted to loop through all these different items here I have in the array, so I'm actually going to simplify that, or maybe I can just do it this way. So I have more items in my array. I'm just going to remove out the second brackets, so that looks okay. Just do a quick beautify of it to make it more readable and presentable. So the same thing if I wanted to loop through and check all the different items that are available. Or maybe actually it's probably better if we just do it with an object. So I'm going to add some additional values here in this object. Just thinking of an easy way to do that. And it doesn't look like there's that easy of a way to do this. Of course, I could use a loop to add in stuff into here dynamically, but to illustrate what we're doing here, if I wanted to loop through all the values in my customer, I can do that with a loop as well. So I'm going to do for, set a variable that we can use to contain this. So a quick glance to see where I'm at. Maybe I'll just use something like m. So setting up that variable so I can make use of it. So I can do m in, and the name of that object is my customer. And this is where we can actually output our content. So I'm going to just console log it out. So we're going to have a whole bunch of entries of the console log. And over here, so I'm just selecting every single one of those for M in my customer, so it'll loop through all the different available items or entries or values in that object. It'll loop through every single one, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, loop through everything. Notice that I don't have to set where it's ending because it's going to automatically understand that it's hit the end of that object. There's nothing else for it to deliver to output. And M is just a value that we're going to be using. So customer square brackets M will output that content. So there we have it here in the right hand side. So John, my at email 20,123, and so on. So these are really good functionalities when you've got a lot of items in order to look through. And that's a really good reason to use loops. There's different types of loops as well. So there's a while loop, which is a more simplified version. So we don't have to have as many arguments available within that loop. So I can do something like j is less than 20. And then here I just enter in that content what I want to happen. So over here I was doing the my function maybe I'll do my function j just to be consistent. And the one thing when you're doing whiles, and one of the reasons I prefer to do these for loops is because over here you still have to have that increment. Otherwise this condition will never be met and you'll never be able to hit that value in order to break out of the loop. So you'll be caught in an endless loop. So j is not defined. So again, format has to be the same as what we did over here where we define I. So a simplified for loop, we still have to define j, looping through j unless we're using j in another value already. We have to define it and then do the while loop. So now when I've given a value for j, and actually I'm going to set a starting value for j, go back out and refresh it, and we see that once I set that starting value for j, we do have that increment all the way up. So it runs it through every single time 20 times until the loop is finished. You can also set default breaks here if you want to break out of the loop. So if I do something like break, this should only run this one time now. So we see that it ran it one time and it broke the loop. We also have an option to continue. So this is if you're doing more customized looping through content and you really need to isolate out those values. So if it hits a break, you can do something, and then when it has completed, then you can hit continue as well. So quite a lot you can do with loops, and it's definitely another one of those things that's worth practicing and worth getting familiar with working with loops. And I'm going to provide the source code that I've used here as well. And again, it is worthwhile to take a look through and try out these different conditions, see what you can make happen, and the different logic that you can apply to it, as well as the different looping mechanisms that are available within JavaScript. So again, I'm going to include a link to the CodePen.io URL in the top of the resource, so that you too can work with the same code that I've been working with throughout this lesson.